Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well and staying safe. Today's video is going to be more kind of academic centred, and if you don't know, I go to the University of Birmingham and I study joint honours of English literature and drama. Before I went to university, I was very lucky in that I had my older sister who went to another university and studied English literature, and she, before I went to university, gave me a list of books of what I must read, and honestly it helped me so much because it set me up for university and gave me just a few of the things, a few tips and tricks and a little bit of pieces of work that just helped me in my English literature kind of start up. And on top of giving you guys a list, I'm also going to be debunking a few myths about studying English literature to a higher level than GCSE. Hopefully this video will allow you to settle your mind a little bit. Without much further ado, as they say, let's get into the video. Lovely. If you're an English literature student, you probably like tea or coffee. My list and my advice is coming from myself and from what I learned from my sister. This is not going to be an extensive list, and this is definitely not going to be the be all and end all, but hopefully this is just going to give you just a little bit of an understanding of what kind of English literature is, and from my experience, what has helped me. First of all, I'm going to be talking about myths of studying English literature. So the first myth that I want to debunk is that you don't have to be a bookworm to study English literature at all. And it is so surprising the amount of people I've spoken to who are studying English right now at university level and who all felt the same way. Also, there's so much more to English literature than just books. And I think that's what I'm going to get into in my list, is that my list isn't just about novels, it isn't just about prose, it's about poetry and it's about plays. The next myth I'm going to debunk is that you don't have to be a fast reader. I know this was a massive worry for me because I'm really not the fastest reader whatsoever. During English literature, your reading speed will naturally just get faster. So that's why you have first year where the books are a lot shorter and you're kind of given a little bit of a foundation, like a baseline. And then after that, it kind of cranks up a gear every single year, just like it does in school. And just gradually, your reading speed will just naturally increase. If I had to give a tip as to how to get through books a week, I would definitely say reading at night is really important. So it's really useful if I set aside maybe an hour and a half, and then whilst I'm getting to bed, instead of watching Netflix or something like that, I will sit up and I will read and I will put a timer on, and then it actually really helps me sleep as well, and that gets me through a book. Okay, so that's kind of debunking the myths. So I've got my list here of my books and texts I'm going to be talking about. So as I've said previously, English literature, I think a lot of people associate it with books only, but English literature can be an amalgamation of many different pieces of literature and art. So yes, there are novels, or prose as it's sometimes referred to. There's also poetry, and then you've got plays, but also other things like films can come into English literature as well. English literature encompasses so much more than just the written word. Having said that, we're going to start off with a book. So this book is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which, if you haven't heard of it, you may have seen the trailer or the little clips of the TV show. So I know that The Handmaid's Tale is often a text that people read in A-levels. I didn't actually study this at A-level, I just read it on the side because I think I watched the TV show, and then I think I was also just knew that it was just one of the ones that quite a lot of schools choose to do. It allowed me to go into the dystopian genre a little bit more. I think the dystopian genre is very intriguing, and it's often kind of talked about in English literature, and it can sometimes be contrasted to utopian literature as well. But also it has a lot of literary techniques. I'm not going to ruin the ending for anyone who hasn't read it, but if you do know the ending, then it's a really good kind of narrator's device and technique at the end. But also the really interesting thing is, and I can't remember where I read it, It was something to do, I was reading this article online or something about Margaret Atwood, the author, and she was saying how everything in The Handmaid's Tale is not made up, even though the Republic of Gilead and everything that goes on is fictional. The actual regime are things that have been implemented previously in other historical contexts. I think that's really interesting. So if you're someone who's really intrigued by historical influences and social historical context, that kind of thing, Handmaid's Tale is a great place to start. But the other good thing about this is that it does include things about the Bible, which is a great segue into my next book. So the next book that I think that you don't necessarily have to have read all of it, because I haven't read all of it, but a really good thing to have is the Bible. In Handmaid's Tale, religion is distorted and it's made into almost cult-like, and it talks about a particular passage between Abraham and, oh my goodness, my biblical knowledge is being put to test now. Abraham has a child by his wife's handmaiden. It makes so much sense now. And they basically base that passage on what the handmaids actually are. The handmaids are made to be are basically conduits for men to have children with their wives, but they have to have it through another woman. It's really interesting seeing the distortion between the ways in which they use the Bible in there. Just having a look at a few extracts and examples that are going to be really useful for you to kind of talk about literature across the ages, whether that's all the way back into the Middle Ages or whether that's all the way up until present day. The Bible and religious resources are used extensively. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to be talking about, plays. Even if you don't necessarily study a particular theatre practitioner, it's always useful to read them just so that you have some knowledge of their writing. There are kind of a group of theatre practitioners and theatre writers who I would definitely say to look into. One being Chekhov. Now he wrote Ivanov, The Seagull, Uncle Vanya, Three Sisters and the Cherry Orchard, which are kind of really big modern theatre pieces. Another really useful theatre person is Henrik Ibsen. He has done plays like A Doll's House, which you may know, or Hedda Gabler, also Ghosts. Ibsen is just a very prominent theatre person and practitioner. So if you have knowledge of who Ibsen is, even if you just do a background check on him on Google, if you study English literature and theatre, you have to read Ibsen. It's pretty much a rite of passage. He marks the shift between melodrama and Victorian kind of burlesque into more naturalism and what we would call classical theatre today. Other practitioners or theatre people I would read, Carol Churchill. Now she wrote This Is Cloud 9. I've done so many pieces of Carol Churchill. And Carol Churchill, she has had an immense theatre career. Her works span across the decades. If you're into like modern day contemporary theatre, or kind of the 50s and the 60s, definitely Carol Churchill, pick up a book of hers. Obviously they're plays, so they're a lot shorter, a lot easier to get through than books. And she's still going now. What a queen. She's still writing to this day. Brecht, Berkoff and Noel Coward are also really useful people to look at. You don't necessarily have to know all their works. Writing yourself, just a little note, like on a little revision thing, who they are, what time they were around in, and what kind of seminal pieces, because even that just knowledge, that nugget, is going to help fill some of the gaps if you're talking about theatre through the ages or modern theatre. So in keeping with theatre and everything, if there's one person who everyone should read, and is the mighty Shakespeare. So I think in GCSE now you have to study a Shakespeare. So many plays in Shakespeare's that are useful, and I would definitely say even just reading one is going to help you, because at some point in your English literature career you are highly likely to study a Shakespeare. And even just having knowledge of things like iambic pentameter, or even just what his writing is like, even though it can be really difficult to read it sometimes, it's just useful, because you're likely to come across him. I would say that particular plays that are very useful to read Hamlet is a very useful one. It's a very good one if you are really into psychoanalysis. I would also say Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dreams are kind of classics that sort of I've talked about quite a lot, and they're often are a little bit easier to read and a little bit easier to understand. So if you're starting off with Shakespeare, I'd recommend those two. And the next one, I don't actually have the physical copy of the book because I haven't actually read this book, but this is one that I think you don't necessarily have to read this book, but please have knowledge of what it is because it comes up all the time. So the next thing is Jane Eyre by Bronte. This book is talked about so much in literature, especially in terms and in regards to feminist theory, because there's a really kind of the seminal piece of feminist theory is Mad Women in the Attic by Gilbert and Goubart, which I actually do have downstairs, but I can't be bothered to get it right now. And essentially, Mad Women in the Attic is a reference to Bertha in the Attic in Jane Eyre. The next thing that I would suggest you read, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. This isn't too long of a poem, but it's just very important because, again, T.S. Eliot kind of marks a shift in poetry. We talk about poetic language, and that is often associated with like positivity and with something beautiful and kind, and T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland is completely the opposite, and yet it's still using poetic language. The Wasteland is really important because, especially in the time that it was written, the context of kind of the aftermath of the war, the excess of humans. He also did another piece which kind of goes hand in hand with The Wasteland called The Hollow Men. And I can't remember at the end of which one, I think it may be Hollow Men. It says humanity or mankind will not go out with a bang but with a whimper. And that kind of line is used very often in a lot of talks about global warming, eco-criticism, green studies, and talking about how humans are basically ruining the earth. So if you're really interested in poetry but don't know where to start, I'd say start with T.S. Eliot, find out who his friends were, find out where he got his literary inspiration from, and just kind of keep following that little trail. The next thing is actually a critical analysis, and this is Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author. It's a very short critical analysis, and essentially what Roland Barthes is saying is that as soon as a writer, whether that is an author, a poet, a playwright, whatever it might be, as soon as you've put the words to paper, or as soon as the words have been published and sort of externalized, that it is also the time in which the author, the playwright, or the poet loses the property of the words. And this is a really important theory because it's often used just quite a lot, and having a knowledge of it, a lot of people might not necessarily have knowledge of it in their first year at university or even at A-level, but eventually you will learn about it. I think the good thing about it was, for me, it was one of the first critical pieces I had ever read, and so it kind of gave me a warm-up as to what it's like to read essays or critical analyses of different works or different theories, and so I definitely recommend reading it, even if it's just a warm-up for knowing what it's like to start to include secondary reading into your A-level or your university work. And the final thing I would recommend about reading is reading things you love. This is so important especially if you are going into university and wanting to know what kind of modules you want to take or what you want to do for your dissertation. Make sure you know what you enjoy reading. Find out what makes you love reading, what makes you love studying, what makes you really have that passion, makes you want to take that subject further into your education. I hope that you found this an interesting and useful video. I hope that wherever you are, you're staying safe, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!